Hi, my name's Chris Brake. I'm here to talk to you about the power of newspaper search on the new migrated British Newspaper Archive site. The BNA, as you're probably aware, is a close collaboration between Findmypast and the British Library, bringing the power of the BL collection to life in technology, drawing on all the expertise that Findmypast have. The new BNA newspaper search is largely based on the Findmypast newspaper search that we rebuilt about 3 years ago. That's because it is arguably one of the best newspaper search platforms now online, and it's been refined with lots of user feedback. It is widely recognised as a very powerful search tool for the newspaper archive, so it's the right platform to migrate to. It also means we can do much more development on an ongoing basis as we're only dealing with one platform. My name's Chris Brake. I'm the head of data products at Findmypast, which means I look after, amongst other things, the British Newspaper Archive, and I also largely led the project that built the FMP newspaper search about 3 years ago. What are we going to be covering today? A quick introduction, but then we'll look at some basics around newspaper search and basic concepts that are important in understanding why things have been done as they have been done. A quick look at filtering, ordering, then get into the details of the advanced search and keyword syntax, names and why they're handled differently and why it's powerful, and then we'll bring it all together with a few examples. Some basics. Look about unstructured and structured data, talk about OCR, some maths behind relevance, language awareness, stemming, and phrase flex. Some of these ideas you may have come across, some you may not. Most of the data in the archive is unstructured block text, like you see on the right. We have over 1 billion articles. I think the average article length somewhere over 1,000 words, so there is a great deal of unstructured text to search. There is some structured data about the issue, as you can see on the left. The date it was published, the title, where it was published. We've added things around coverage type. Is it a local title or a national title? Some article type data. Is it an article about politics or crime, or is it an advert? We can talk about the data it was added to archive, and we can filter on the front page. So there are some structured data fields to filter on, but those are filters. The bulk of the searching has to be done on unstructured text data, which is complicated and challenging in a number of ways, and I'm going to explain some of the tools as we go through this presentation that help you get the most out of it. To add to the complexity, much of the text is actually OCR derived from microfilm, and microfilm is great in terms of how fast you can scan large numbers of pages, but unfortunately the quality of what's available on the microfilm is often not great, which leads to some OCR text also not being great. Now, we are working progressively to improve the quality of the OCR we can get out of the microfilm holdings, and this migration actually is a great enabler for us because it enables a whole bunch of new technology and new approaches to brought to bear to improve the OCR as well as the zoning into articles. Immediately there won't be a huge change, but it's a big enabler for change, and we are trying to improve the quality of this OCR. But sometimes, yes, the text is a little bit gibberish like. There is actually a lot of maths involved. Sometimes I hear people say, oh, well, it's just about keyword matching, isn't it? Anybody who says that really isn't fully understanding the complexity here. Matching keywords and finding articles that contain keywords is, to be sure, relatively straightforward. It's also fairly useless because for most searches you're going to put in, you'll commonly find thousands, often tens of thousands of results, which is as useful as no results actually. So the important thing is, well, what's the order those are presented in? And this is where the whole idea of relevance comes in, because what you might not think about it, but what actually makes newspaper search usable is the relevance ordering of the results. So when you start typing in terms and you search on a term, the results that come top of your search are the ones that are most relevant. Now that doesn't happen by accident. It's actually a lot of quite complex maths going underneath here. Methods like TF, IDF and BM25 are touching this realm. But you don't really need to worry about that, because this is essentially a mathematical representation of something you probably already intuitively know, which is that words which are generally less common or rare, but occur a lot in a single article, are more useful in searching than common words which occur in many articles. So, proper nouns, for example, we'll talk about searching for information around the Battle of Rorke's Drift later. Rorke's Drift is great because it's a very specific proper noun. It doesn't appear very often in the archive, but suddenly when there are a bunch of articles about what happened at Rorke's Drift, it appears many times in each article. So it's a great discriminatory word. So proper nouns are good, place names are good, people's names are good. The more unique a word is, and the more likely, well, I'm only going to hear that word in an article about that subject, the better it is to discriminate. And that's why those words were used to drive relevance. It's also worth reminding that the search engine does not have any idea of language. It is not able to understand the text it is searching. As far as the index is concerned, it's just lots and lots of blocks of symbols. This is Korean text. I believe it's a poem about the Bluebell Railway, but you'd never know that. You couldn't search that based on context. I could give you a string of symbols and you could find the matching pattern of symbols in there, but you couldn't search with any understanding of the language. The newspaper search index works in the same way. It is matching symbols. Now, it does quite a lot of clever stuff around that to make it feel like it understands some of the language. It doesn't, and that's all a little bit sleight of hand. It's evolving, and with the rise of AI, it starts to bring capabilities to really start to understand the language a bit more. But for now, it's matching symbols with a bunch of clever tricks around the side to make it feel like it's understanding the language, but it isn't aware of language. Let's talk a little bit about stemming. You'll see the tick box around exact keyword search on the search, and lots of people often don't really understand what this does and doesn't do. Well, a key concept in language searching, text searching, is the idea of stemming. And so if you look at the examples here, the words changing, changed, change, all have the same stem. Likewise, the words studying, studies, study. You could expand examples with like fisher, fisherman, fish, fishing, all have the same stem. What the newspaper search is actually doing is searching the stems of words, which means that if you search fishing or fish, you'll find results for anything with the same stem. Okay, that's generally what you want to do. In more often than not, searching exactly as it does on the stems of the words rather than the exact word is exactly what you want to do. If you really, really want to get exact keywords, and which will be only the letters you type in with no variation, then you can put on the exact keyword box. Generally, that will massively restrict results down. It won't give you anything where the word is pretty close but slightly different. It might be a plural versus a singular. You'll lose all of that if you put on exact keyword search. So generally, we advise people to turn it off and leave it off, which is what it's defaulted to. If you put it on, it will remove the stemming capability. You'll only search on the exact strings you've typed in. Also worth saying that we ignore a whole bunch of things we call stop words. This, the, and, what, is, who, the kind of examples here, because they offer no discriminatory value because they basically appear in almost every article. So those words just ignored, whether you put them in the search box or not. Another concept we've introduced in this product is the idea of phrase flex. Phrase search is very powerful because it enables you to search for words in conjunction with each other. And anybody who's going to have done a newspaper search knows how important that is. So as well as phrase search, which was present in the old BNA, there's a couple of concepts we've introduced here. The first is phrase flex, which is, yeah, you can search on a phrase, but we can introduce a level of flex into that phrase, i.e., so In this example, Star Wars, on a phrase flex of 0, it has to be the phrase Star Wars. Those two words in that order with no variation. If you introduce more phrase flex, you can start to have, well, those two words close together, but not necessarily in that order, and maybe with one or two words in between. So you can see the example on the left here, and the phrase flex is basically how many steps you would have to go from the phrase you're looking for, in this case Star Wars, to the phrase in the potential target to see if they're matching. So Star Wars with a phrase flex of 7 is saying, well, I could go for wars that happen to be near a star, down to Star Wars through 7 moves. This is kind of very useful when you have a phrase that might be sometimes used with additional words around or in it. It might be that words are reversed. We use this in how we handle names, for example. Again, if you don't want to use this, don't worry about it. Just type in the phrase. It will assume a phrase flex of 0. But if you want to introduce a little bit of variation around your phrase, you can add that in. Filtering and ordering results. All of the filters you would expect to see are there. You can see them pop up under the kind of the filters icon, and most of them are self-explanatory. Coverage type is about things that is it a local publication or a national publication or a capital or a metro or regional? Where does it cover? Article type, it will have a look at later, but it's about what kind of article content is this. Date added to the archive front pages, date published, mostly pretty obvious. Within date published, there's a number of ways you can do it. You can either define specific date ranges, you can choose by period, from half century to decade to year to month to date, and there's a quick one to just put on this date, because one of the things we've introduced is that any newspaper published on the date you're looking is free. Just for the day. So we have a quick on this day in history filter, which will only show things published on the same date as you're currently looking at. When you've added filters, they all appear as these little pills under the search boxes. So at any time you know exactly what filters you have applied. Anytime you can just hit that cross and remove them. So there's a lot greater clarity on what filters are working at any given time. And in terms of ordering the results, you can set these to order by relevance, which is the default, but then you can order by publication date, if you want to see chronological order, or you can order on added date, essentially when were they added to the archive. You just want to kind of repeat a search and see when things that have been added most recently. Okay, let's move into the advanced search and keyword syntax. Now, the advanced search and the simple search box are completely interchangeable. Anything you create in one absolutely maps to the other. In the simple search box, the default you appear, it relies on an understanding of syntax. So you can write with a combination of symbols that kind of represent various terms. That's fine. Or you can just write it into the advanced search form, and if you then go to the search page, you'll see everything you've written represented in that syntax. Okay, so let's walk through what's in here, because this is kind of an encapsulation of all the capability really. Names. This is a change from BNA in that we have a separate box for names and keywords. Names are sometimes difficult to handle, and the kind of things you want to do with the text to find all the matching names is sometimes not completely intuitive. So if you are interested in finding a particular person and you have their name, then you are better off putting that name in the name box. It will do somewhat smart stuff with that to find that name. You can also search for multiple names, which through an example we'll see a little bit later is very powerful in finding articles that connect people. If you don't want to use the name box, just leave it blank. There's no requirement at all to have anything in the name box, just leave it blank. If you just put other text in that name box, you'll probably still get some search results, but it will be doing odd things in the background that you probably don't want. So the name search is intended for names. Use it for names, it will work very well. Don't use it for anything else, and if you don't want to use it, just ignore it. That's fine. Keywords. Keywords here, you'll see fields must include, exclude, and prioritize results that include. And then on phrases, you have the same options: must include, must exclude, or prioritize a result that include. And with those phrases, you can add in a degree of phrase flex per phrase. Okay, and you can add in multiple phrases. Just come to that in a second. Now, so this is all based around 3 tests. This is for words or phrase. And so we now have separated what might have been slightly kind of pushed together in the old BNA. There's the must include list. This can be must include words or must include phrases. This is saying only return me articles that do include this word or several words or phrase or several phrases. Essentially the default here is a logical boolean and we're saying everything that is in the must include must be present to return it as a result. The must exclude is the exact reverse. Anything in that list, do not to return any result that contains this word or this phrase. The prioritize is here rather in place of an or. The trouble with or, sometimes in newspaper search, is that if it's used as a true or, it can return massive numbers of results and it's an unmanageable volume. And so we changed the way we do this to say, well, we're separating anchor text, which are the must include, must exclude words, from prioritization text, which is, well, with all the results you've defined for me from the must include, now within those results, prioritize results that include these other words. In practical terms, the way you use this is instead of an or operator. So where you might have had other words that kind of, oh, well, this one word may be there, I'm interested in results that may include some of these things. Use that as a prioritization tool. Okay, so if you look here at some of the keywords, words and how we handle that, must include death and memoriam, must exclude the word probate, and prioritise results that include the role honour. This is around a search if we're looking for roles of honour in the newspapers from military service. A phrase here is, of course, 2 or more words. If you only put single words in these phrase blocks, it's going to just work like a keyword. But a phrase is about 2 or more words. Multiple phrases can be very, very powerful in terms of finding combinations of thoughts. You can see here we're looking for in memoriam, role of honour, fallen heroes, some flex or slightly different phrase flexibility on all those things. And it's all being combined. You can see at the bottom right there, all of the things we've looked at from the past 2 screens are combined now into this syntax. The minus symbol, exclude. The phrase with a tilde and a number is a phrase with a phrase flex. And prioritise is here, the fallen heroes phrase. So, quick reminder on what phrase flex is doing there. Also, wildcards. Wildcards do work in keywords. There's 2 wildcards, asterisk and question mark. Asterisk for multiple characters, question mark for single characters. They will work in the keywords field, but they will not work within phrases. Computation is too expensive to handle wildcards within phrases. So only working keywords that are not phrases. They will not work in the names field. Okay, and let's move on to names and why we're handling names separately. The names box here is for names only. It is optimized for names, and back to my earlier point, the search engine doesn't understand language. So it doesn't understand that some text is a name as opposed to any other kind of text. So in order to help us search for names, which are presented sometimes a little bit differently from other text, we've put in a bunch of rules to help it handle this. Okay, so searching for name, if you have a name, you are better off putting it in the name box. It will do smarter things. And if you have multiple names, searching for them together, just separated by a comma as a logical and, gets really powerful. Okay, so it can also now handle middle names. It can handle titles and honorifics and do sensible things. We'll see that in a second. It don't, within the field, use quotes. Don't use any of the syntax symbols. Don't use wildcards. Don't use any non-name content. It will just do odd and silly things. And don't input multiple variants of the same name. Okay, so another thing it's doing in here is differentiating between the occurrence of a name in the title text of an article or in the body text of an article. The default, somewhere under the hood in here, is that if a name occurs, if a phrase, if a word or a keyword or a phrase occurs in the title of an article, which typically is the first 200 characters or so, it'll be upweighted substantially, right? Which is sensible. If you find an article that has the words you're looking for in the title, it's probably extremely relevant. So it's a very sensible thing to do for keywords. For names, rather the opposite is true. If you put in any form of relatively common name, what you're likely to find if you prioritise the title is lots and lots of classified adverts. Because lots of the old newspapers, the pages are covered with classified adverts, and lots of them generally have the name of the person or the shop or the trader at the top. And so if you're looking for Robert Smith, you type Robert Smith, and under the hood we kind of essentially put a bit of phrase flex in there. You'll find lots of classified adverts. Actually, what you want is probably articles that talk about Robert Smith. So again, the name box is doing different weighting in terms of how titles are handled. It also handles middle names and honorifics and sensible things about name reversal. So, consider Major James Rutherford Lumley, a good example that I fished out of Google. Joanna Lumley's father, I believe, though whether the exact one we find reference to here is the same James Rutherford Lumley, I'm not sure. We consider Major James Rutherford Lumley in the names box. A few things are happening here. Major is recognised as a military rank and therefore not required. Rutherford is recognised as a middle name and therefore not required. So the basic requirement here is James Lumley. With the exact keywords on, and also with the phrase flex of 2, which means it would also match Lumley, James, which is a very common way that names are handled in newspapers. Within that, there are other prioritised results. So we would look for the full string, Major James Rutherford Lumley, and we just look for the string without the title, without the rank, James Rutherford Lumley. And so you see results like you have here on the left. James Rutherford Lumley. The first result has Major James Rutherford Lumley, full text. As you go down these results, and you find ultimately you just get to things that just have James Lumley or Lumley, James in the results, because they still match, right? So this is an example of how the name search is doing a more powerful trick here. Multiple names is even more powerful. Same thing, Major James Rutherford Lumley, but now we've combined it with Thomas Vernon. And so we can see here, okay, well, I've now got an article that's got James Rutherford Lumley and Thomas Vernon. There's no Major James Rutherford, but there's a James Rutherford Major, Lumley, which is fitting because of the phrase flex, and in an article with Thomas Vernon, often presented as Vernon Thomas. Okay, so here you see, actually this is just a list of bankrupts that they happen to appear in together, but it's an interesting demonstration of the principle here. So you've got, you looked for Major James Rutherford Lumley and Thomas Vernon. You found an article that finds Vernon, Thomas, and James Rutherford, Major, Lumley. That's a match, but a simple text string wouldn't do that. So again, if you want to use names, if you've got names, if you're looking for people with names, use the names box. If you're not, just ignore it and leave it blank. that's fine. So it's a powerful tool if you want to use it. You don't need to. Now, let's take a look at a few examples and bring it all together. And we're going to pick up on some of the things we talked about earlier, and James Lumley we'll look into, and then I'm going to dig around with a few subjects that kind of illustrate the point. We're going to look a little bit at a couple of searches around the Battle of Rorke's Drift, which was of course made famous by the Michael Caine film Zulu. We're going to look a little bit at the Ernest Shackleton Endurance Expedition, and we're going to pick up on a book I read recently, which is a fascinating tale about Herbert Asquith and his relationship with a young lady in the run-up to the First World War, recently published by Robert Harris in his book Precipice, which I can recommend as a fascinating tale if you haven't come across it. So, let's look at the results. Now, first of all, we'll go to the back old to Major James Rutherford Lumley and Thomas Vernon. So these are the results of here Major James Rutherford Lumley and Thomas Vernon together. Okay, as you can see, the top has got was the article we looked at. As you go further down, James Rutherford, Major Lumley. Most of these actually relate to that petty sessions and bankruptcy listing. If I go back here and just remove Thomas Vernon from the equation, so we are now just looking at Major James Rutherford Lumley, you're back to having 3,443 results. The top will be Major James Rutherford Lumley. Fine, but if you then go down and go, some way down the results, you're now getting James Rutherford Lumley, James Rutherford Lumley, James R. Lumley. Okay, it's also matching. Keep going. We hand Major James Rutherford. If I just order these by completely something completely arbitrary, we'll now find there are lots of results with just James Lumley in here. Again, you wouldn't have seen those if you were based on relevance because they're a long way down the list, but if you just arbitrarily order it, you'll see James Lumley is matching against that. That wouldn't happen if you were using the keywords field. So the names field works very well here. Now, let's go on to Rorke's Drift. Okay, and here we're starting to look at the combination of names and keywords. So I'm going to blank this out for now, but if you start on Rorke's Drift, over 50,000 articles. Fine, ordered by relevance, lots of articles about relevance, but actually I'm interested in some of the individuals in the battle. So Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead was the Michael Caine character in the film. If I now search, I'm finding, okay, we're applying the power of the name search that can handle the rank, remember, and the battle. And okay, you're finding lots of articles now that specifically mention him. The other main character in the film was John Chard. Again, okay, so I'm narrowing down. I'm finding articles that mention both of them at Rorke's Drift. Fine. Equally, you could also scrub that and look for one of the other characters, a more junior character, but someone who won a VC on the day, and say, okay, I'm now into Rorke's Drift, and I'm finding Frederick Hitch examples. That's great. Fantastic. Okay. If you don't want to look at names, you just want to search Rorke's Drift. But here, so I've got the 50,000 results I had before, but now I've prioritized using the hash symbol Isandlwana. For those into the films, this is what happened in the film Zulu Dawn, but it's another battle that happened the same day where the British fared less well. And so this again mentions, this is Rorke's Drift, but it's mentioning the other battle as well. You can see this is prioritised articles that now talk about both of those battles in the same day. So again, you've got a phrase here, Rorke's Drift. You've got prioritisation word, this Isandlwana. Phrase is also, of course, very useful. In this case, Rorke's Drift is a two-word place name. Phrase is very powerful for multi-word place names. let's talk about Sir Ernest Shackleton. So again, Sir Ernest Shackleton works really well as a name. Again, it can handle the Sir as an honorific and title. Endurance, of course, was the ship he sailed in. And so, okay, well, that's great. So Sir Ernest Shackleton Endurance gets you thousands of articles, obviously with, the most relevant at the top, matching his full name. Fantastic. But if you wanted to dig it a little bit more into detail on that one, well, I'm interested not only in Sir Ernest Shackleton, but also Frank Wild. And I'm interested in a particular part of the expedition, or rather the rescue mission, which talks about South Georgia and Elephant Island. So for those of you who don't know, Elephant Island is the island he managed to get all his crew to over land, and then he adapted a small boat they had dragged over the ice to then sail with 3 other men, I think, including Frank Wild, to South Georgia, and they then came back to Elephant Island. So this particular bit of the rescue here now is in some detail talking about these expeditions. And obviously on the search results you get the little thumbnail here if we want to take a look at this result. You can see some of the examples here. This is the arrival I think on Elephant Island, or the life on Elephant Island. This is the departure of the small boat that sailed to South Georgia before he then returned. Okay, we'll also just come on to a little bit later some of the other functions in the image viewer, but now let's just take a quick look at what we've got here. So this is the new image viewer. As you can see, it's highlighting the keywords from the search results. Sometimes it gets a little bit off. I do apologise for that, but you can turn that keyword highlighting off. You can obviously flick onto a full screen view if you want to. You can do exactly what you'd expect to do in terms of image control. You can, if you want, invert the colours. This helps to make some text more readable. You can play around with saturation, brightness and contrast to your heart's content. You can always just revert it back to normal. You can zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. Also, if you want, you can see the whole publication. So we have a film strip at the bottom here that can put every page of the publication in a row, and you can easily scroll through the different pages if you want. If you want, you can view it in double page spread, which for an example like this is very useful because that's how it was designed originally. So now, yeah, you can see these 2 pages side by side on a double page spread and see the cross page photos. I think this is a great image viewer experience. Okay, I think it's big improvement on the old one, and it introduces some other capabilities that we'll talk about in just a second. You can still see, if you want, the breakdown of articles. In this case, there's only one article on the page, so we'll look at this on another page in a minute. And you can clip, which again we'll come back to in a minute. But basically, and yes, one other capability here. If you are just searching through a publication issue by issue and you just want to see one issue after another, you can easily go from this, which in this case was the Sphere on December the 15th, 1916, to the next issue, which was the Sphere on December the 23rd, 1916. And so for those of you who in your research just like to work through a series of issues of a single title, cover to cover, this is a great way of just stepping through them all. Let's talk about Herbert Asquith and the book Precipice and Venetia Stanley, because I was fascinated by this story and it's a good example, I think. So, in a nutshell, Herbert Asquith, over the year or 2 years before and during the first year or so of the First World War, so fairly monumental events were happening as he was Prime Minister of Great Britain, wrestling with the Irish question, wrestling with the start of the First World War, was also having a quite intense affair with a lady called Venetia Stanley. Now, Herbert Asquith was in his 60s at this point. She was in her 20s. She was kind of pretty progressive, part of a dynamic progressive set called the Coterie. But they were, whether the exact nature of the relationship is not entirely clear, but they were writing letters to each other. A lot of letters, a lot of very intense love letters, And his letters to her survived. They were surfaced in the 60s. She'd kept them. In the 60s they were found. In the 80s they were published. And so we have the exact words he was writing. And he was writing it sometimes 3 letters a day to her. At the time, though, none of this was known. They were just in the same social circle. And so it becomes fascinating now to look at a search for the 2 individuals, Venetia Stanley and Herbert Asquith, in the newspapers. And most of the contemporary mentions are basically just kind of courts and social notices. They talk a lot about events where they were both present. His Asquith was very good friends with Venetia Stanley's father, Lord Sheffield. So he spent a lot of time at their various houses around the country. And then you find some articles from much later, which are now, in the 80s, articles about, well, that appeared around the publication of the book, when it suddenly became clear what had been going on between these 2 individuals over this monumentally important period. And so it's fascinating kind of balance. And then just to kind of look at other characters in the book, in the end, to sort of exit this particular relationship, which was becoming quite tricky, she married a chap called Edwin Montagu, who was also in Asquith's cabinet. At the time, we don't know the dialogue, but the book paints a very interesting kind of fictional challenge to the relationships there. And so we can look again at all the examples of articles that talk about Venetia Stanley and Edwin Montagu, their wedding, and they were then quite a big society couple. If we filter this down a little bit, the sketch is always very good for photographs. We can see the individuals themselves. There is Venetia, and there is Edwin Montagu. She had to convert to the Jewish faith to marry him so he could keep his fortune, and it certainly implied that in fact it was a marriage of convenience for both of them because he was probably gay. So fascinating story, fascinating insight into what was going on. No contemporary awareness at all of this, but then decades after the event all these letters come out and you can look now at the individuals. I found it fascinating to, having kind of read the book, to now go into the newspaper archive and look at the individuals and find them, photographs of them, discussions of the social world they all moved in. Now, something else becomes possible here with the new image viewer, which is clipping. So if you are fascinated, as I have been, by some of these topics, you can go into a newspaper and say, well, that's great. Okay, I really want to just clip this bit of a newspaper page here. And you can just define the clip you want, and you can clip that selection. Now, a few things happen here. You've clipped a selection. A few things you can do with that. First of all, it's quite useful. You can share that, and you can share that link with anyone completely outside of the British Newspaper Archive. So you don't need to have an account or any kind of log in with Findmypast or the British Newspaper Archive to see this. You can share this link with anybody and they will be able to see this clipping. They won't be able to go into the newspaper and see it, but they can see the clipping. So you can share clippings. As well as that, you can add these clippings to collections. And collections are essentially like scrapbooks. So if you find a subject you're interested in and you just want to take a clipping, you can take that clipping and you can add it into a scrapbook, in this case a collection. Okay, and here's just a few articles I found about this particular affair, clip them, put them into the collection. Now, collections are very powerful. As well as your own, there will be a whole bunch of collections prepared and offered for you. You'll be able to see other people's collections. You'll be able to decide whether or not to share your collections or keep them private. There'll be collections curated by BNA. There'll be the collection curated by Findmypast. Rich world of collections, essentially lots and lots of scrapbooks of people here. Now, that pretty much brings to an end this presentation. I hope that's been useful, interesting. Congratulations if you stuck around for the whole thing. I think that this move is an enormous improvement in the power of the newspaper search. I'm sure I'll be doing more presentations and talks about it. It does involve some change. Obviously, those changes are all done for good reason. They are all positive in terms of the capability they introduce and the things that they enable in terms of future development, improvement in the OCR, improvement in zoning and that kind of thing. So this actually is a massively good change. I appreciate for some people on the BNA this will be a change to what they're used to, and that can sometimes be frustrating, but it is all making the whole thing much more powerful. And I hope you enjoy the new newspaper search. Thanks very much for your attention. I hope you have a good rest of the day.